I think we're live. Brianna, you want to check if we're live? All right. Well, either way, they can always watch the recording later. Hello, everyone. I'm Thomas Hall. I'm Executive Director here at CleanStart. And today we have a CleanStart perspective where we're going to have a chat with some people who are very knowledgeable in EVs on different experiences with them. And I think it'll be a good conversation. But first off, I want to thank those that support us. And we're supported by SMUD, Workspaces, Fresno State, River City Bank, Chico Start, and Weintraub Tobin. They support us in helping us build the clean tech community. And we're really grateful for everything that they do and help us bring these programs to you. Now, I'd like to welcome our two guests, one who that'll be here shortly, Ash and Katrina. Through CleanStart and SAC EV, is actually how I met Katrina and Ash, both of them. And through the years, I've learned about, their love of EVs and their experience in it. And I wanted to actually start off by letting them introduce themselves and their background a little bit. And I want to start with Katrina.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. Hey guys, happy Thursday. So as Thomas said, I'm Katrina. I've known Thomas 5 or 6 years now, I think.
Yeah.
So I am total nerd about EVs, electric vehicles, all that fun, great stuff. I have a background in environmental science as well as a master's from UC Davis in transportation. So I'm like well versed in this lovely, lovely field. So not only am I like a nerd here, I'm also like working in the industry for a nonprofit called CalStart. And CalStart is his whole goal is to advance zero emission technology in transportation and really, make a difference out in the world. I also drive an electric vehicle, so I have the very fun and very fast in my opinion, Hyundai Ioniq 5. Her name is Sonic because it's Sonic the Ionic, and it's a good pun. It's a good time. That's a little bit about me. I'm happy to chat more, but I'm really excited to be here.
Excellent. What was your first EV?
So I originally had the 2011 Chevy Volt. So I started with a PHEV, but my family actually had the original EV1 back in the day. So I had the original, both battery chemistries, the nickel metal hydride and the other one whose name escapes me. So it's been really interesting to see the paddle charger and then J1772 and sort of watch things progress as time and technology continues.
And then I'd also like to welcome Ash Dahl, owner of Ohm Electric Cars. He's been working on electric cars for quite a while, and he also went to UC Davis. Could you expand upon your background, Ash?
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you having me on board here. But my name's Ash Dalal. I started my own consulting business, Ohm Electric Cars, a few years back, smack dab in the middle of a pandemic, which is awesome. But that's leveraging about 25 years of doing just this stuff, in this space, just like Katrina mentioned, way back in the day with paddle charging and inductive charging and conductive charging, all those struggles that this industry has faced over the last few years. We're finally seeing it all come together, but we also are now reaching with smaller businesses that are trying to emerge in the space that are trying to find that balance between cost, performance, and time. And more often than not, the performance part of it is more often than not neglected because, hey, it's costing too much or it's taking too much time and we need to get something on the market real quickly. Hence, we have battery fires. So there's a lot of differences now that the industry is now facing, but we're also, being this proactive mode where we're working on a lot of, workforce development as well as a lot of training here in Sacramento, where I'm now supporting the CMC with those efforts. And we just recently had a ribbon cutting event yesterday for our new Charger Help training session that is now going to certify folks to become EV technicians or EVSC technicians, and that'll now progress into the SAE certification along with providing OSHA 10 and NFPA 70 training. So if anybody's interested, feel free to reach out. But in the meantime, I'm happy to introduce my business to anybody if they want to swing by Dixon, want to see some cars on the dyno and have some fun doing some EV conversions, so we can take a look at those at the same time. So
Yeah. Well, what was your first EV?
The first and only EV is a 2014 Fiat 500e that I bought for myself that my wife liked more than I did, so she took it, and I haven't reaped any of the benefits of it. But
How many
kind of
miles
in,
are on it?
we're at about 60,000.
That's pretty good. That's pretty
Yeah.
good. Um,
I've got three other ones that are torn apart that I'm doing some work with, but still kind of in the market for something that I can afford because I'm not liking this $200 a week gas habit. So the new Equinox Blazer lease deals are looking really nice.
so even with that, where they say like, oh, EVs need less maintenance, you've managed to have parts of all sorts of EVs in your shop.
Yeah, so that's a great point
So
to
like
bring up
like
because
most mechanics. Um,
right, yeah, I'm a hoarder by
they,
heart, so you'll see me in a new episode next season. So, but in the meantime, we have had these vehicles on the road and the same ground, same rocks, same chips, same speed bumps as every other car. So, saying that they don't need maintenance is a big kind of no-no. But we have 10 years of experience already to show seals and bearings and connections all still wear out. Just because they are operating the same conditions. And so we try to promote a lot of that inspection, in this whole we don't have to maintain mentality thing. Like, no, you still have to in order to keep that maintenance and also keep the longevity and reliability, but also the performance, and the range of these vehicles as long as we can.
yeah, and I think it's worth noting that, you know, nothing kind of lasts forever. So the expectation that all of a sudden you won't have any maintenance is kind of a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one of the one of the maintenance things that I think people just as a note kind of forget is that you have to rotate your tires, right? Having an EV doesn't change that. My Nissan Leaf, which I got to about 25,000 miles over, um, 7 or 8 years. You know how many times I replaced all the tires? Twice.
Yeah.
Twice.
Well, the challenge I'm
And
seeing now is a lot of customers with like the Model S Plaids and all these high, fast pollutant cars that have staggered wheels. More often than not, they don't have the high efficiency, low rolling resistance tires. They instead have the S, grade, high performance, 150 mile plus, but 295 rear, 265 fronts, where they have no choice but to let them wear out at 20,000 miles. So depending on the car you have, where you don't have unusual car tire sizes and you are in that low rolling resistance mindset of those tires, yeah, maintenance of those is just the same as any high performance tire or any tire that we've been used to for the last 100 years.
because I think maintenance on your car, at least, when I had a gas car, it was, I got my oil changed and then they would also do the tires, top off the fluid, change my windshield wipers. Um, I finally broke down and got new windshield wipers last year for the first time for my Nissan Leaf. Fortunately, unfortunately, we had a lot of years of drought, so I didn't really need them. But it was really reflected in the fact that I didn't drive a whole lot. I didn't have to rotate my tires. I had to get them replaced. So there's things about, your how your life kind of changes when you have to interact with an electric vehicle. Now, Katrina, you actually started your research on how people would find charging um in the, out in their regular life. And charging is probably the biggest kind of, I guess, modal kind of shift that people have on EVs. What was the first things you kind of discovered on it? And then I was curious, like, how have you watched charging change from when you graduated with your master's years ago now, right? Um, to now.
Yeah, so it's been really interesting, I guess, temporally just thinking about like when I first had an electric car to when I did my research in like 2018 to 2020, and then looking at like now how things have changed. So, I mean, I think now there's still home charging is still the largest portion of people's charging, and then secondarily comes work, and then comes public. So that's fairly well known. I think with the like more communities that might not be able to have home charging or doesn't have like a dedicated parking spot, the workplace charging and the public charging is going to change. Like more people are going to want to be charging there, and then you're going to have to like the industry is going to have to respond to that and be more flexible and be able to have charging infrastructure where people actually drive. So my research was really focused on workplace charging, charging management strategies, as well as just like charging etiquette, which I'm like fascinated with. It's like so interesting to hear like what people have to say about the built environment and how like one person might be upset at somebody and they don't even see it as like an offense, for example. So like the biggest one is always like, do you like people leaving their car at a charging station and then blocking it so nobody else can charge? And so
See,
even though
Davis.
the yeah, right. So there's like big, it's very interesting drama. And so drama, in my opinion. And so like, everybody has a different thought about that. So, if you leave your car at the airport, for example, like Sacramento Airport has a bunch of level 2 chargers, like out in the boonies, well, not in the boonies, in the covered and the uncovered parking lot. And those are all level 2 chargers. And so people are just sitting there. And if they're gone for multiple days, they're not available to anybody else. So that's really where I think like level 1 charging, for example, can be a really important asset because it's more ports for the same amount of power, right? Because it's like 1 kilowatt versus like 3 at minimum. And then more people can charge. So really right sizing the charging for the location, I think is important.
Have you ever been mad at a charging station?
Yeah, I get mad. I have like unbridled rage about these things because I've done research on this. I was like, why are you here? But conversely, I mean, I try to do karma, I try to pay it forward. Like I was on Davis campus on Sunday, Saturday. I don't know, parking was free, charging was free. I was going downtown, but I wanted to charge. And so I parked on campus and I got a spot, but a Prius plug-in pulled in next to me and I was just hanging out. And so I ended up just leaving early because there was no more available chargers. And he was like, are you sure? Is that okay? And I was like, you got to have karma. You got to have like a good feeling about this because it is a shared asset. And so you want to be able to charge when the opportunity arises. So just little things like that are sometimes lost on new EV owners.
Yeah, that's I think a big thing because sometimes it's like, oh, we'll just plug it in and forget it, and then you come back and you're full, and you don't know how many people have driven by that space there. Now, I think the state of California has this goal of getting I think another million EV chargers installed, and I think those are level twos. And I right now we're not very close to that, and I think we're behind. You can check out on the EV dashboard on the CEC site. But what are some of the things that it takes to, like, if we're going to install a million EV chargers, what are some of the work that it takes to install an EV charger, Ash?
So there is a pretty substantial amount of work involved that isn't any different than what we are now doing in any other residential and commercial installation. It's just the certifications and basically the checking process to make sure that it's installed, but to a loose standard right now. So because of the fact that the evolution of vehicle to grid, the evolution of Bluetooth connectivity and all the other connections to the vehicle as well as the grid, these units are doing more than just supplying power. They're thinking, they're talking, they're doing all this other communication work that is also kind of a hindrance in the installation. So while the electrician comes out and says, okay, here's your 223 phase, here's your single phase 208, here's your 120 level 1, then what? And it's still not working, you basically taking care of all the mechanical aspects of it, but now this electrical aspect of it is still under debate. And that's where more of this is ballooning into. Now I got to call the banks. Now I got to call the apps. Now I got to call the charging companies as well. So that's the challenge I'm seeing right now is getting that to work. As well as the fact that we're now confronted with electricians that are now having to overbid, some of these opportunities because they hold the certification while the guys who are on the ground level doing the physical work are doing the physical work. So they're the ones having to, absorb the small cost, but now they have to overbid just because they have to officially be certified to install these things. So it's kind of this hodgepodge of the restrictions and the rules that are now evolving, but also the technical ability to do it hasn't changed. It's just the folks that are now doing it now have to be sort of proactive in understanding what do I need to do to be compliant? What do I need to do to be safe to do it? What do I need to do to be the official EVSE installer? And that's just causing more effort than it is to actually install it.
Yeah, it reminds me, we went around and interviewed a bunch of EVSE installers, and when we asked what the most beneficial skill was, I think the quote was being able to fight a raccoon in a crawl space.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times doing the wiring is kind of the simple work relatively to some of the more physically exhausting work that's in it. Now, recently at CleanStart, we've had a lot of discussions around kind of the smart grid edge technologies. Um, are we gonna have to am I gonna have to reinstall my home charging so that it's smart in the future, or is there something that's going to be able to work with me? Are we gonna have to reinstall all these chargers again?
Well, from my perspective, on a residential unit, at least you have an outlet. You're not hardwired in most
Mhm.
cases. And so if you are not hardwired in, then it's simply, yeah, you have to buy the latest and greatest. But it seems as though, as the world is now evolving into J3400, I'm still kind of uncertain of where we are on this fork in the road. Are we going megawatt charging? Are we going CCS1? Are we going 3400? And so as all of us are EV advocates are ahead of the game and understanding that, we still are confused ourselves. And so it's always baffling to answer these questions. But I think, and this transition, I can't not agree with the fact that we have to keep our units. We have to replace them at some point because of this fork in the road that we're in. As more and more manufacturers are now going to be progressing into the 3400, I'm still not clear myself as to the physical port itself, whether that's going to be the Tesla style or the 72 or 1772 style instead. And with that, that's also going to promote more, variances in couplings and in the hardware and the connectors, all this other stuff. So it's basically reinventing the wheel again, but we are at that fork in the road still. And I don't see us not keeping the original equipment, and I'm sure even with my Clipper Creeks and stuff that still have a shelf life and life themselves, they'll probably wear out in 5 years anyway. So it's my
Yeah,
skepticism. Yeah.
like
I think that's interesting though, Ash, thinking, sorry, about like J3400 and like the Tesla standard and CCS, not only from the light duty perspective, but also from the medium and heavy duty perspective too. So, because I work with buses too, and so the transit agencies are also very concerned about this. And I
Mm-hmm.
have heard that there is, some interest in J3400 in the medium duty sector, but I really haven't heard of any in the heavy duty sector. I haven't done a lot of research. I haven't looked specifically, but I think that's another way that there could be some interesting overlap or actually like barriers to adoption there. That if the heavy duty sector, the class eights, the transits, the class sevens aren't adopting at quite the same pace as light duty, there could be some other interoperability or like shared use infrastructure concerns as well looking forward.
Man, that's a great point you bring up with the medium and heavy duty classes, is the fact that there's also now another standard coming up too that is now split into three substandards now for this, classification of, 6 and above trucks. So we have a conductive charger that looks like an anaconda, this huge connector. We also have an overhead crane that can now come down to, let's say, public transportation systems, buses and such. And then they also have the original cable car style where they now have the unit going up to the charger. So if I'm now
Mhm.
driving an electric bus to a public station, I can now, pit myself, allow people to come in and out, but then charge for that opportunity for 5 minutes or so, 2 minutes. But either even coming down, but that's now split up into another standard too, where if I'm now going into this public megawatt charging solution where I have a Tesla, big anaconda style, connector compared to my 3400 style connector that's supposed to do the same thing, now in a class 8 operator, I'm even more confused because now I'm where I am 10 years ago with passenger vehicles. Inductive, conductive, I just want to go home.
yeah. And we're trying to get everyone to buy EVs, and
Right.
especially on the heavy duty vehicles with all the different kind of chargings, where it seems like if you go to one part of the country that has electric buses, it has a completely different charging system than you'll see anywhere else in the country, potentially. And then when you're trying to adopt them somewhere, you're kind of like, okay, what do I look at? Who has done this? Um, when you're trying to talk with people about adopting these electric vehicles through whether it's at SAC EV or your work at CalStart with heavy duty vehicles, um, what are some of the concerns or things that are holding people back, and what are your responses to them, Katrina?
Yeah, so the biggest thing is power. There's a lot of concerns about being able to bring that much power to a location that isn't necessarily ready for it or really connected. So, I mean, if you think about it, a lot of buses, you just park them on a dirt lot, on a paved lot, and they barely have power for like security lights. That's probably all they have it for. And if you need like, if there's 10 buses times 150, kilowatts, I'm not good at math, but that's a lot. That's like, you know, that's a lot of power that you need. I should have gave an easier number. That's like a couple of megawatts. Because there's just like, and so if you have to talk to the utility, I mean, SMUD is very well known to be very happy about helping and assisting in a timely manner. But you have PG&E or looking across the country, there are other utilities that might be more nervous about that much power. There's also stuff like doing a lot of like route planning. So, you know, the transits at the end of the day, they really just want to move people around, and there's often less concern about the power type or like the fuel type, if you will. So as long as they can complete their routes, they're happy. And so there's a mandate in California that the transit buses are having to go zero emission, be it battery electric or hydrogen. And there's a similar rule for municipal fleets and, you know, trucks, ACT and ACF. And so they're all sort of struggling with this because, you know, if you don't have enough power, you're not doing a lot of good fleet transition planning. You're not thinking about the cost of electricity and how to do like planned charging management planning to help lower the cost. There's just so many questions. And so just having an open conversation is important.
Yeah. Well, now I want to kind of play a little bit of a kind of, I guess, a fun game. Where I'm going to get say some things that I've heard and maybe you have heard, and I want you guys to respond to them, and we'll take turns on this. Um, Electric vehicles are worse for climate than gasoline cars because of power plant emissions. Who wants to respond to that first?
You want to go, Ash?
Okay, so if we take a pie of all of the potential energy methods that we can extract from the earth, oil is this one sliver that immediately comes from one source of dead dinosaurs in the ground. The formulation process, the way it comes from the ground into our car is a very linear process that's been set in stone that has its emissions and has its byproducts and stuff. When we consider that, the end product is still energy, right? It's in the form of fuel. When we now compare the EVs, where it now diversifies that portfolio to include this one slice of the pie, but also the crust and everything else around it that includes solar, wind, biothermal, everything else around it now. And we now diversify that portfolio to now increase the amount of non-polluting renewable resources. That index now becomes much lower. So when folks say that your emissions are increased by the production of electricity, I don't believe that, but also the fact that the tailpipe emissions are zero at this point, again, including the whole tailpipe to, factor in there as well. I would hardly believe those people are telling the truth.
All right, okay. Electric vehicles, they just don't have the range to be able to do what I want. Katrina.
That one's just mean. I'm like, okay, how much range do you need? Like, I need more details, right? So it's like, you know, somebody who travels from the Bay Area down to LA every day. First of all, that's crazy. Don't do that. But like, you know, second of all, like, what you shouldn't do that. But, you know, so thinking about like really what range do you need on the regular, like on a daily, weekly basis, and what are like annual long trips that you take? So you really need to right size your vehicle for your daily applications and less for that one trip you take on Thanksgiving that you go to Wisconsin. Like you can rent a car for that. And I feel like there's a lot of like people forget that you can just like get a zip car, you can get a Turo, or you can do something else. You can also take an EV to Wisconsin. Like I'm down to clown, like let's go. But I know like but people get hesitant about doing some of those things. And I think once they have an electric vehicle and they're really driving and sort of feeling it out, they're more comfortable to take these longer trips that you do you do need to trust the infrastructure will be like ready to rumble when you are.
And I have a follow-up, but there's nowhere to charge.
That hurts. There are places to charge. Like, come on, guys. Like, Google it. Like,
we're just
that
we're just that society. 15 years ago, we had 100-mile cars. I want 200. We gave them 200-mile cars. We want 300. We gave them 300-mile cars. We want 400.
Yeah.
We're not driving to LA every single day. So it seems like there is just this unforeseen demand that just has no justification to it. And that's why
but Ash, the batteries are unreliable and need to be replaced every few years.
What? Says who?
We just had a meeting with Dr. Frank through WebEx. You know, the hybrid mentality really kind of comes back into picture there, where those excessive costs and those excessive amounts of capacity that are not necessary in some cases really made the hybrid make sense back in the day, where I can now justify my small driving loop, which is to and from work, all electric, and then have the added capacity of a gasoline engine for those long distance runs. That was an immediate solution for those who have that anxiety, and the question of, do I have charging available to me if I'm going to the middle of Wisconsin? Surprisingly enough, I'm sure there are some more infrastructures there now than there were 5 years ago, but that question still arises. What if I'm in the middle of BFE? Well, then you still have a hybrid,
So what about battery life?
So, the battery life question has still been up for debate, where now, because of the fact that the consumer electronics world has progressed to a point where we're now doing far more in control and far more in communications to the batteries, as well as the manufacturability of these batteries improving so much, where we can precisely pinpoint the exact cell that is now part of a billion that have been produced that have been a problem. We have certainly progressed to a point where we are now more confident in saying that our battery lifespan is increased, but that is still a function of how we drive it, how we maintain it, and how we properly use them, in the terms of just charging and plugging in at night. The same time, the try to reform my sense here, but the at the same time, while the batteries are now being produced well and they're being controlled well and they're now being used well, we're still learning at the fact that there's still more to learn, there's still more to do, and we're certainly improving on it. But the fact is, the automotive industry still holds the common design criteria of 10 years, 20% degradation, and that's it. And they're certainly going far past that, especially with Tesla, in their involvement. Every car that they produced, every battery that they produced is fed back to them with data that they've continually improved upon to now prove that, hey, we were getting 300, 400,000 miles.
So of your 2015 Fiat, right? How many times have you replaced the battery?
None. I mean, it still gets a good about 75, 80-mile range with Jen at the helm versus me, where I don't get too much. Maybe going to the taco stand down the road, I barely get that much range. So depending on your driving style, she's a lot more conservative than I am, but and far lighter than I am. So there's that. But I haven't had any problems. The only thing I've had to replace on that are one set of tires and chassis battery. Not to say the Fiat factor is kicking in. It is a really cheap car still, and so the armrests and things like that are falling apart. But regardless, the powertrain is still a $50,000 Bosch, high-end unit, just in a really crappy old, Fiat.
So here's one that I hear a lot, and it's of course one of the long answers that. So I'm going to encourage both of you to kind of answer it, but remember to keep it short on it.
Yeah.
The electric grid cannot cope with electric cars. All right, you each have 30 seconds.
I mean, not yet. We're working on it. It can handle it. It's very interesting right now to think about like how hot it's been recently in Sacramento, where we all are. Like, I'm dying, my air conditioner's on. Tossing in some more electric vehicles is going to be tough, but I really think that the utilities are being proactive and really thinking about how to appropriately manage the load that they know is coming. Like, it's not a surprise. It's known.
I am actually staring at two development units from a company called GenCell that are hydrogen, units or hydrogen fuel cell units that are now backup power supplies for DC fast chargers, as well as commercial units that are now deployable and easily installable to a point where you can now avoid those communications with the utilities and when and how you're going to get my infrastructure up to speed. So we have solutions in place now that are either fuel cell based, there are diesel engines, gasoline. There's some form of creating energy for DC fast chargers to kind of give us a band-aid solution for now. So, I'd like to say that, yeah, there is that challenge still of the grid not producing enough, consistently enough, reliably enough, but we have a solution still in the middle to get us to a point where they have time to now progress, do their own deal, do their own R&D to create their own solution for that. But until then, I don't see why we can't do this with our interim kind of band-aid fixes that we have now, including these interim, gen cell fuel cells and things like that.
Yeah, and one thing I also like to highlight is a lot of people like to extrapolate to the most extreme thing that could happen, where if you gave everyone an EV right now and turned it on, that would hurt the grid. But you know what? Not everyone today or even the next year is going to have an EV. EV growth is increasing, but it seems like a lot of people expected it to double every single year. But that's only really easy when the denominator of your ratio is small. Um, but now we're getting a much bigger population of EVs. More sales are continually increased, 11% quarter over quarter or year over year recently. So we are having more people with EVs. There's more charging infrastructure and things are getting smaller. But what's one thing that each of you wish you knew before you started driving an EV? It's a tough one.
Yeah.
I wish
I
mine
got
was remember to rotate your tires.
uh I have this like lifetime alignment on my Volt. So every time I was like, okay, we're drifting, I would just make them align it again, rotate them. So that was very nice. I don't know. I really like my car. I feel like it's fairly self-explanatory. I really like one pedal driving. So I'd say like that is something that people have to get used to. And sort of other like the fun, fancy things that relate directly to EVs can be tough for people. But I mean, it was fairly self-explanatory. I was very pleased.
I'd like to say that, the advice that my parents have always given me of shutting doors when the air conditioning's on, making sure that the doors are locked and such like that now kind of correlates to the EV world where I just got to make sure that my connection is secure. They're more often than not, I walk by the car outside and my wife didn't properly plug in the 1772. So I see the two, failure charging lights rather than charging. So I wake up in the morning getting yelled at saying, hey, why isn't my car charged? It's your fault. I'm like, well, just the same reason why my gas car isn't filled. Thank you. But in this case, so there's
dynamic there.
so well, yeah. So there's still that additional thing that we have to do, which is common sense. If it is plugging in, make sure it's secure. If it is, time to rotate my tires, it's time to rotate my tires. It's time to check my tire pressure. Keeping those kind of continual things, just like me shutting off the AC when I'm not home, shutting the doors when the AC's on, things like that have been embedded in my head as a kid.
And in her defense, you have an advanced degree from a UC on electric vehicles. So you getting blamed for electric vehicle problems seems a little bit more realistic than
it's always my fault. I'm either wrong or really wrong, right? That's the joys of being married. My wife's
we've been talking for a little bit, and I know we have some knowledgeable people in the audience here today. Any initial thoughts or comments? Peter, what was your first EV?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, my first EV is the EV I still own, which was a 2013 Tesla.
2013 Tesla. How many times have you replaced the battery?
The main drive unit battery?
Yeah.
0. The 12 volt battery that powers all the accessories, 3 times.
And I want to say, has anyone met someone who has changed their battery or replaced their battery because they had to, not because they wanted to? I'm not talking about like a Bolt exchange in, or I've known people with Nissan Leafs that they go get battery upgrades and expansions, which I don't think is quite the same. How many people have you, met in the EV life that have had to go and change their entire battery?
I've actually had to replace 3 customers' cars, their Chevy Volts with a V, the first generation ones actually, because they have also encroached their moment of time where GM's predictions were far below what their actual performance was when they anticipated this decay. Instead, they got that. Forgot to carry the one, talking to the engineer sort of deal. But either way, so the only option they have, unfortunately, is buying used units. And so they're kind of taking the risk, which all 3 of them have, of saying, well, I've got a unit that had lower mileage. So the only criteria that they have to compare is mileage. It's just like me going to the pick and pull saying, I've got a lower mileage engine, which I assume is better. Same thing. It could have been driven less. It could have been driven more. It could have been charged. We don't know anything about the history because we can't tap into that communication quite yet, but they're taking a risk. And so I'd like to say that 2 out of the 3 were successful in replacing their aging battery with a semi less aging battery. and we're able to get incrementally maybe 2 to 3% more performance out of it in terms of range. But that one last person who spent more money with the lower mileage battery ended up getting less performance because of the fact that that battery was driven hard in that time, apparently, and just lost all of its capacity. But from the exterior, from the pick and pull, the dismantler, they just said, oh, it's only got 30,000 miles, so it's therefore 30,000 miles good, you know.
Yeah. And those are, you're talking about volts, which haven't been sold in years. And you said first generation volts, so that's even longer. And of the, I think over 1 million EVs in California and the thousands of people that we've talked to, between all of us, we only know three times, and it's the mechanic that works on hundreds of EVs. Um, you know, so I think there's
I
a
think
lot
the
less replacement than
interesting
people thought.
part, actually,
But
that I've heard too about, thinking about replacing batteries is really like a standardized way to determine battery state of health. Thinking about like what are second life applications for some of these batteries, not only light duty, but thinking about heavy duty and thinking about transit, because an end of life battery for the Volt is like, what is it, like 10 kilowatt hours, 12 kilowatt hours. My Ionic 5, her battery is like 75, I think, 80 kilowatt hours, large. But a transit bus, bro, like those are like 700 kilowatt hours. And, what do you do with that? And, is there a market for folks wanting to use that? Maybe strip it apart and put it in another vehicle, put it in a car, use it for grid storage, use it for just like fleet energy storage. Just like, how do you think about that? Like, there's not like a straightforward solution that I've heard of yet about how to judge state of health of a battery. So I don't know
so
if you know
You
anything
just
more.
talked about my business plan for my new up and coming nonprofit that I am just getting the paperwork
nonprofit,
signed. Yeah.
is that the plan, or is it just going to end up that way?
I just decided nonprofit because it's more to focus on workforce development. So the extraction process of those batteries, I think, is a great opportunity for folks to learn. It's just like any other food process or like a fast food job. You don't need very much to get into that market. And just like this, I just need a couple hours of training and I can do this. But there's still this opportunity, like Katrina mentioned, where now I have this asset here that I don't know what to do with, but now I have some inventory of it
So I
coming from
wanted to
the
kind of,
coming from the hoarder.
I kind of wanted to like kind of maybe wrap this up, but I want to ask, where do you see, I guess, opportunities, or conversely, places that we still need to work on in EV adoption and kind of the energy transition around it? You just mentioned, being able to have people work on batteries and growth, um, time of use. Where do you see like, places that could trip us up on this transition?
You go first, Katrina.
Oh gosh. I really think infrastructure. So not even thinking about the vehicle, but thinking about location of infrastructure, like we talked about at the beginning, I think. Like
Mhm.
there's been so much funding and there will be so much funding related to getting charging stations out there in the world. CalStart is managing a number of projects for the state, trying to get funding, education, outreach to people. But if nobody's listening, you don't know. Like, I play a game, I've said this before, I play a game where I look for car charging in a parking lot, or if I don't see any, like, where would the ideal car charging location be? You go to the mall, you go to the airport, all these places, and like, where could you put it and how do you right size it? And if you don't have an EV, you're not thinking about an electric vehicle, you don't see it. You can't think about it. You can't conceptualize how much money there is, how much help they've been getting. So infrastructure is really big for me, I think.
Ash?
I would like to say we need to be somewhat in a role of reverse psychology. There's been quite a bit of resistance from my end from talking to people, doing a bunch of things. Once I mentioned EV and I'm an EV engineer, I automatically say, you're not going to shove that crap down my throat, and you're not going to let me buy this stuff. Well, unfortunately, it's another option. I totally agree. It's not for everybody, but unless it strikes that interest that captures my interests on that level, if I'm a towing person that I tow all day, automatically I'm going to say, no, I'm going to stick with my diesel. But have you tried an EV? Have you given that opportunity to see what towing is like? If I understand how much benefit it's going to do me, not having, diesel expenses, not having to change the oil every single, 3,000 miles with 10 gallons of oil every single time, not having to do these routine things, and well as getting performance that can now blow me through the grapevine at 80 miles an hour going uphill. They don't know that until they experience it. So I think what we need to do is take those questions and those uncertainties and say, well, don't buy this EV because it won't give you better mileage. It won't give you, And so I think that'll now attract people, because it seems like they are so resistant because they feel like this whole shoving down people's throat of EVs is causing a lot more resistance than I thought. No one really likes that unless they understand the benefit for themselves for their own application.
All right, and we have a raised hand from Peter.
Yeah, I just want to say, I mean, I agree with Ash 100%. I mean, when SAC EV goes out and does display events and talks to people about EVs, I mean, that's exactly what we tell them. We tell them our experience. We tell them the truth. If they come up with obviously, a lot of times they come up with a fake use case, but if they give us a real life use case, if we don't feel that the EV is the best car for them, we'll tell them. Say, no, it's probably not going to work for you. But you could consider a plug-in hybrid. It might work, and you still get some of the benefits there. So I agree. I mean, you need to be honest with people and make sure, I mean, there are some use cases where it won't work right now. It may very well work in the future, but yeah.
I like that a lot. Sacramento Electric Vehicle Association goes out in Sacramento and hosts these ride and drives. In fact, that's where I kind of got started talking about it. And I found humor works a lot to disarm people on it. I think the first person that was combative with me on adopting an EV, their statement was, "My Ford Raptor can outperform your Nissan Leaf." And it's like, okay, I have an idea. Let's race. You take a gallon of gas. I'll take a gallon of gas. We'll see who can go 10 miles faster. And made him chuckle. But yeah, it's, sometimes talking to people that they're, that they kind of come combative out there. Another one of my favorite things was, you have the Chevy Volt and you have the Chevy Bolt. Next year, Chevy's coming out with the Colt. So the Volt, the Bolt, and the Colt. And that's
just don't be adult when you're buying one.
Yeah, well, that's just proof that Chevy marketing hates you.
Yeah, careful, we might revolt.
Yeah.
So it's funny you bring it up. So one of the things that I'm experiencing now that I, especially with this EV lowrider conversion project we have with Sava and AQMD and such, this is a great kind of example of how we're now taking not only the technology into the conversion space, but also now culturally bringing it together. The thing that hit me the most was a student coming up to me saying, this whole restriction in 2035 is now going to take this cultural icon of low riding away from me. And I'm like, no. We're not aiming to do any of that. We're just providing a transition into the space to show you that we can do the same thing and modernize it. We don't have to carry thousands of pounds of lead acid batteries anymore when I can condense that into a 20-pound battery, so it doesn't seem like that understanding is in place, but we're now approaching this kind of, resistance, but now that one cultural aspect of it was really the thing that hit me the most. It's like, no, we're not taking anything away from your culture with this.
Yeah. And to be fair to EVs, nobody was building low riders until the culture did.
Yep.
So the culture is going to exist, and they're going to take EVs and they're going to turn them into low riders, because they weren't getting low riders from Chevy and they weren't getting them from Ford or Cadillac. They made them. So I think they're going to innovate and do great there. And with that, any other questions from the audience anyone wants to ask or put to people here? Gary.
Okay, so I don't own an electric vehicle. I'd love to, but the boss says no. I own a diesel that accelerates 80 miles an hour up the grapevine, towing a 14,000 pound trailer. Yeah, and I got to buy all the stuff for that. But as an observer of human behavior, people at home are generally lazy and cheap. So Thomas and I have this, yeah. Thomas and I have this ongoing argument about what's going to dominate, how many kilowatt hours are going to go in electric vehicles by what route. I'm on the side of it's going to be public stations, like similar to a gas station. And people will wind up not getting the $10,000 level 2 chargers in their garages. They're going to do something where they plug it into where the dryer goes. Take any 220 outlet and, just limp along with what that will do for you. And I don't know whether technologies are going to change. Certainly, if a lot of homes have battery storage and you've got a direct connection to DC, somebody's going to have a cheap DC fast connect or fast charger connection. Where are we in appealing to the homeowner who is lazy and cheap? Doesn't want to own anything that he doesn't have to. If all he has to own,
I think we need to get rid of this whole subscription mentality. If they know they're foreseeing this cost every single month, that automatically scares people off. Unless I have this bulk investment, then I no longer have to worry about it. Then the cheap part of me says, okay, that's good. I don't have to worry about one more expense. But now we're having these continual, accounts that we have to hold to say, in order for me to gain this service, I have to pay $19 a month, $20 a month. And a lot of these subscription-based services are really from a cheap person like me who doesn't have any money, that can't support that every single month. That's what continually worries me. So if there's some way to extract the subscription part of it to say, here's a fixed cost, go for it, that would certainly make my life a lot easier.
Yeah, I am lazy, so I charge at home, so I don't have to go get gas. So check. And I hate subscription services. I agree with you, Ash. They're incredibly annoying. And so I avoid them wherever I can. So that's why I charge at home.
well, how about cheap? What kind of charger do you have? Do you have a level 2?
Yeah, so I actually I put solar on the house too. There was a upfront cost, but I think with electric vehicles you really have to think like holistically down the lifetime of the vehicle. So you have to get the diesel, you have to get the gas, and I plug in at home. I've got the solar, so that helps lower the cost. And I also just think it feels good personally. Like you were talking about numbers and stuff like that, but I think there's often like the part where it's like, well, it's just fun to drive an electric car. It's just like good. Like, I don't know, Gary, if you've driven Thomas's Aria, but like it's just fun. And that's all, like you can't put a cost on that. So
it's not my Aria, it's my boss's Aria.
all right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
An Aria in existence around.
Yeah.
Well, I think great businesses will be built on lazy and cheap as your driving forces.
Yeah, well, I am so lazy and so cheap. I do not even have a home installed EVSE.
There you go.
I just have the outlet, and I use the portable charger that came with the car, and I plug it in. And when it's done, I just unplug it. And typically I just leave the charger in the garage, but I have never bought one. And I guess I'm so cheap that I installed the outlet myself. I didn't even hire an electrician. So, but I did get a permit. I did get a permit, so it's done. It was done legally.
And I think to get our level 2 charger, we spent about $1,000, which I think we had a very convenient spot. It probably couldn't even actually gotten easier than where we had to put ours. It was on the wall opposite side the panel.
Perfect.
Yeah. So that's a tough one there. So I'm going to go ahead and try to wrap this up here. I want to thank Ash and Katrina for joining us today. It was a good discussion. We'll see how it goes online. Also, I want to highlight our upcoming events. We have a power up where we're just going to talk and network. Also, Grid Alternatives is joining us that day. And if you are a fan of the grid and have all these wild ideas about what the future of the grid looks like, we're going to have our own Peter Mackin from SAC EV come and tell us, what are the realities of the grid? This is an old image here, but it's the realities of the grid, not the future AI of the grid. But we'll be talking about that with Peter Mackin. You can check that out on our website. And also later we'll have portable fast charging platform discussion, which there is a startup that is now doing a mobile fast charging platform. Come check it out. And now for the last words, what makes you love your EV? Katrina, go.
Oh, it's so fun to drive. It's a good time. I hate getting gas. It's beautiful. She's very cute. The stereo system is sweet, and I don't have that gas engine in the back that's like rumbling up with my music, so I can jam quietly. Like the car is quiet while I turn the volume up really, really loud. So you can't hear me, but you can hear the music. Sorry, that's what I have to say. I love
Ash?
her.
As an owner of 18 combustion engine cars with anything from 454s to 1100 horsepower, supercharged V8s and Weber carbureted, classic cars. I love my EV as old as it is. Because of the fact that it just doesn't have everything that those cars have, which is all the nuances of maintenance and things like that. I can just drive and let the ambiance kind of relax my mood rather than the rumble of a Flowmaster, exhaust. So I just appreciate everything about it, the cleanliness, the sounds, the feels. I mean, the torque, the instantaneous performance of it. That's what got me in to begin with. But it's as I'm getting older in my age, I like the comfort.
I think that's a good one to end on with. They're just nicer, but remember, rotate your tires and look at it just for regular upkeep and maintenance. So
I
thank
gotta
you
head
all
to
for
LA
attending.
right now with my 400-mile range.
So thank you for attending. Remember to connect with us and see you all later. Bye.
Great session.
Take care, everybody.